The first time I saw them, rain poured from the sky like God himself was weeping. My little food stand, nothing more than a weathered cart with a tattered awning, offered little protection from the downpour that had cleared the streets of the usual lunch crowd. Business was bad enough without the rain. 3 months behind on rent, electricity cut off twice, and the constant gnawing fear that tomorrow would be the day I'd finally have to admit defeat. That's when they appeared, two identical faces, gaunt and hollow-cheeked, peering from beneath a shared newspaper canopy. Twins. Boys. Maybe 12 years old with matching dark eyes that had seen far too much for their age. Their clothes hung like rags on scarecrow frames, and neither wore shoes despite the October chill. "You boys hungry?" I called out, already knowing the answer. They approached cautiously, like feral cats expecting to be shooed away. Up close, the similarities between them were striking, same high cheekbones, same curly black hair plastered to their foreheads, same wariness in their expressions. Only a small scar above the left eyebrow of one distinguished them. "We don't have money," said the one without the scar, positioning himself slightly in front of his brother. "Protective." I waved away his concern. "Today's special is free for anyone caught in this mess." My hands moved automatically, making 2 heaping plates of rice, beans, and my grandmother's secret recipe carnitas. It was food I couldn't afford to give away, but something in their hollow gazes made economic sense seem suddenly unimportant. "I'm Maria," I said, sliding the plates across my little counter. "Maria Vasquez." The twins exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that only people who shared a womb can have. "I'm Daniel," said the protective one finally. "This is David." David, the one with the scar, offered a shy nod before they both attacked the food with a fervor that confirmed my suspicions. These children hadn't eaten in days. "Slow down," I cautioned. "There's plenty more." But they couldn't slow down. Their bodies remembered hunger too well to trust that the food wouldn't disappear. I turned away, pretending to wipe down my already clean counter so they wouldn't see the tears welling in my eyes. I'd known poverty my whole life, growing up with 6 siblings in a 2-room apartment in East Los Angeles, watching my parents work themselves to illness trying to feed us all. But there was something about seeing hunger in children that still cut straight through me. When I turned back, they'd licked their plates clean. David, the quieter one, looked up at me with something like wonder. "That was the best food I ever had," he whispered. "Where are your parents?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I refilled their water cups. Daniel's face hardened. "Our mom died last year. Cancer." "And your father?" "Never met him," Daniel replied with a shrug that tried too hard to seem indifferent. "Where do you stay?" Another exchanged glance. "Around," Daniel answered vaguely. I nodded, understanding their caution. Street kids learn early that giving too much information can be dangerous. The system that was supposed to protect them often did more harm than good. "Well, I'm here every day from 7 to 7, I said, packing up 2 more containers of food. "You're welcome anytime." As they left, huddled together under their soggy newspaper, I watched them disappear into the grey curtain of rain. Something about them, their fierce independence, their obvious bond, the way they protected each other, reminded me of myself and my sister Elena when we were young. Before life pulled us in different directions. Before the cancer took her too. That night, I counted the day's meager earnings and tried not to think about the mounting bills. The rational part of me knew I couldn't afford to feed 2 extra mouths. My little food stand barely supported me, never mind 2 growing boys. But as I stirred a pot of beans for the next day's service, I found myself making extra. Just in case. They returned the following day, arriving precisely at 3:45 p.m., after the lunch rush but before my usual closing time. They stood at the edge of the sidewalk, hesitant, until I waved them over. "Right on time," I said cheerfully, as if I'd been expecting them. I was just about to take a break. "Would you help me eat some of this?" I made too much. The lie came easily, wrapped in kindness. Their eyes lit up, though Daniel maintained his suspicious guard. "Why are you helping us?" he asked bluntly, even as he accepted the plate. I considered various answers: compassion, charity, basic human decency, but settled on the truth. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it," I said, thinking of Mrs. Abernathy, my high school English teacher who'd paid my college application fees when my parents couldn't. "And because everyone deserves to eat." Over the next week, they came every afternoon, their initial wariness slowly giving way to a cautious trust. I learned they were sleeping in an abandoned building 3 blocks away. They'd been in 2 different foster homes after their mother died, but ran away from the second when the foster father had raised a hand to David. They'd been on the streets for 4 months. "Winter's coming," I said one day as I watched them devour chicken soup. "That building won't be warm enough." "We've got blankets," Daniel said defensively. Always the protector, always ready to prove they could manage. I nodded, not pushing. "My apartment's small, but I have a couch that pulls out." The offer hung in the air between us, unexpected even to me. What was I thinking? I could barely take care of myself. But something about these boys had worked its way under my skin, into my heart. Daniel shook his head firmly. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity to help family," I said quietly. His eyes met mine, fierce and proud. "We're not your family." "Not yet," I replied, and turned to serve another customer, leaving him to think about that. That night, as rain again pounded the city, I lay awake thinking about 2 boys huddled in a leaking building, wondering if I'd pushed too hard, if they'd return tomorrow, or if my offer had frightened them away. I wondered what Elena would say if she could see me now, practically adopting 2 street kids when I could barely keep my own life together. "You always did lead with your heart instead of your head," she'd probably say. And she'd be right. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the pounding on my door just after midnight startled me awake. Heart racing, I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to find 2 drenched, shivering boys on my doorstep. "The building's flooding," Daniel said, his protective facade cracking just enough to show the frightened child beneath. "David's got a cough." I swung the door open wide. "Come in," I said. "You're home now." I didn't know then how those words would change all our lives. I couldn't have imagined the journey we were beginning, the struggles we would face, the battles we would fight, the love that would grow between us. I only knew that something deep inside me recognized these boys, as if they were always meant to be mine. And as I tucked them into my pull-out couch that night, watching their breathing finally slow into sleep, I made a silent promise: whatever it took, however impossible it seemed, I would give these children the home they deserved. Before I continue, kindly subscribe to this channel. Morning came with uncertainty hanging thick in the air. I woke before dawn, my habit from years of running the food stand, and found myself tiptoeing around my own apartment. The twins were still asleep, David's chest rising and falling with a concerning rattle, Daniel's arm thrown protectively across his brother even in sleep. I made breakfast quietly, the rich aroma of coffee and frying tortillas eventually stirring them. Daniel woke first, instantly alert, eyes darting around to remember where they were. When he saw me, something like relief flickered across his face before the guard went back up. "How's David?" I asked, sliding a plate of eggs and beans toward him. Daniel glanced at his still sleeping brother. "His cough gets bad in the damp." I nodded, concern knotting my stomach. "There's a clinic a few blocks from here. They work with people who don't have insurance." "We're not going to a doctor," Daniel said firmly, the fear evident beneath his stubbornness. "They'll call social services." He wasn't wrong. 2 unaccompanied minors would trigger mandatory reporting. But David's rattling cough worried me. "Let's see how he does today," I compromised. "But if it gets worse, we figure something out." "Deal." Daniel studied my face, looking for deception. Finding none, he gave a curt nod and attacked his breakfast. Later that morning, I called my assistant manager, Louisa, to cover the food stand. In 5 years, I'd never taken a day off, but today felt more important. David's fever spiked around noon, his forehead burning under my palm. Daniel paced our small living room like a caged animal. "We should go," he said, panic edging into his voice. "They'll take us away." I sat beside David on the couch, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "Nobody's taking you anywhere," I promised. "But he needs medicine." After an hour of gentle persuasion and one terrifying moment when David couldn't seem to catch his breath, Daniel relented. We bundled David up and took him to the clinic, where an elderly doctor with kind eyes diagnosed pneumonia. "He'll need antibiotics," the doctor said, studying us over wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you their guardian?" The question hung heavy. A lie would be easiest, but something told me honesty might serve us better. "They're staying with me," I said carefully. "Their mother was my cousin. She passed recently." Not completely false, these boys had become family to me in some inexplicable way. The doctor seemed to understand what I wasn't saying. He nodded slowly. "I see. Well, family is family." He wrote a prescription, adding, "This medication isn't cheap, even with our sliding scale." I thought of my nearly empty bank account, the stand's dwindling profits, the rent due in 10 days. Then I looked at David's flushed face, and the decision made itself. "We'll manage," I said. The antibiotics cost nearly $200, money I couldn't spare. But watching color slowly return to David's cheeks over the next few days made every penny worth it. I worked longer hours at the stand, sending Louisa home early to save on wages, serving until the last possible customer had gone. One evening, about 2 weeks after the twins had arrived, I came home exhausted to find my small apartment transformed. The dishes were washed, the floor swept, and dinner, simple sandwiches, but still, waited on the table. "We made dinner," David announced proudly, his health improving enough that he bounced slightly on his toes. "And we cleaned up," Daniel added, attempting nonchalance though I could see he was gauging my reaction. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "It's perfect," I managed. That night marked a turning point. The twins began helping at the food stand after school, yes, school, because I'd somehow convinced them that education was non-negotiable. I'd registered them using my address, spinning a story about being their aunt, taking custody after their mother's death. The school administrator, Mrs. Torres, had given me a long look but asked remarkably few questions. Whether from kindness or overwork, I never knew. We settled into a routine. Mornings meant breakfast together before I walked them to school. Afternoons found them doing homework at a small table beside my food stand. Evenings were for cooking together, sharing stories, building something that began to feel dangerously like family. But reality had a way of intruding on our fragile happiness. It happened on a Tuesday, nearly a month after they'd moved in. A black SUV with government plates parked across from my stand, and a woman in a charcoal pantsuit approached, clipboard in hand. "Maria Vasquez," she asked, her voice professionally neutral. My heart stopped. Daniel, who had been refilling napkin dispensers, froze beside me. "Yes?" I managed, my mouth suddenly dry. "I'm Diane Watkins, Department of Children and Family Services. We received a report concerning 2 minors in your care." Daniel's eyes met mine, panic-stricken. I squeezed his shoulder gently before he could bolt. "The boys are my family," I said firmly, though my voice threatened to shake. Ms. Watkins consulted her clipboard. "According to our records, you have no legal relationship to Daniel and David Mercer." Behind me, I could feel Daniel tensing, ready to run, to grab his brother and disappear back into the streets. The thought made my chest constrict painfully. "They're my sister's children," I lied, the words tumbling out before I could consider them. "My sister Elena's." Ms. Watkins raised an eyebrow. "We have no record of an Elena Vasquez as their mother." She used her married name, Mercer. Another lie, built on the foundation of the first. Elena had never married, had never had children before cancer claimed her at 29. I have documentation at home. Birth certificates, my sisters will naming me as guardian. Ms. Watkins made a note. "I'll need to see those documents. And I'll need to speak with the children." Panic flooded me. There were no documents. No legal claim. Just love and desperation and the absolute certainty that these boys belonged with me. Of course, I said, forcing calm into my voice. Would tomorrow be acceptable? The boys have school today, and I'd like to be present when you speak with them. She hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. at your residence. Here's my card. As she walked away, Daniel turned to me, his young face aged by worry. We don't have those papers. No, I admitted. We don't. So tomorrow. Tomorrow, I said, meeting his eyes steadily, we fight. Together. That night, after the twins were asleep, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, Ms. Watkins' card beside me. The rational part of me knew the odds were impossible. A single woman with a failing business and mounting debt had no chance of keeping two boys who weren't legally hers. But as I watched them sleeping, David's head resting against his brother's shoulder, I knew with absolute certainty that I would do anything, risk everything, to keep them safe. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the only person who might be able to help us, Miguel Reyes, an attorney who came to my stand every Thursday for lunch. I couldn't afford his services, but I hoped our friendly rapport might earn us at least some advice. As the phone rang, I whispered a silent prayer to whoever might be listening, please. Let me keep them. They're already mine in every way that matters. Before I continue, kindly subscribe if you haven't. Miguel answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. It was nearly midnight. Maria? Is everything all right? I need help, I said, the words catching in my throat. Legal help. It's about two boys. Brothers. There was a pause, then the sound of movement. Give me 15 minutes. True to his word, Miguel arrived at my apartment 14 minutes later, still tucking his shirt into his slacks, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. I'd known him only as a customer, the lawyer who ordered the same thing every Thursday, carnitas tacos, no onions, extra salsa, and left generous tips, but as he sat at my kitchen table listening to my story, his dark eyes intent and non-judgmental, I realized I'd underestimated him. You've created a family, he said when I finished, glancing toward the sleeping twins. But legally, this is complicated. They'll send them back into the system, I whispered. Separate them. Miguel's expression hardened. Not if I can help it. We spent the night strategizing, creating a narrative that wasn't quite truth but wasn't entirely fiction either. By dawn, I had a plan, fragile as gossamer but better than nothing. At precisely 9 a.m., Ms. Watkins knocked on my door. The twins sat on the couch, scrubbed clean, wearing the new clothes I'd splurged on last week. Daniel's face was a mask of carefully controlled fear. David fidgeted, unable to contain his anxiety. Good morning, Miguel greeted her smoothly, introducing himself as my attorney. Ms. Watkins' eyebrows rose slightly at his presence, but she maintained her professional demeanor as she took the seat offered. I understand you have documentation regarding your relationship to the boys, she said, getting straight to business. Miguel stepped forward, handing her a folder. Ms. Vasquez has been pursuing legal guardianship since her sister's passing. Here's the initial filing. The document, hastily prepared in Miguel's office before dawn, looked impressively official. It wasn't a forgery exactly, more a premature filing. Miguel had indeed submitted it this morning, rushing to the courthouse the moment it opened. This only initiates the process, Ms. Watkins noted. It doesn't establish guardianship. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, Miguel replied with a practiced smile. But Ms. Vasquez has been the boys' primary caregiver since their mother's illness began. The legal formalities are catching up to reality. Ms. Watkins turned to me. And the birth certificates. My heart hammered. This was the weakness in our hastily constructed defense. Unfortunately lost in their mother's final move, Miguel interjected smoothly. We've applied for replacements. Ms. Watkins made a note, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to the twins. I'd like to speak with Daniel and David alone. I opened my mouth to protest, but Miguel's hand on my shoulder stopped me. We retreated to the kitchen, leaving the door ajar. Through the crack, I watched Ms. Watkins speak softly to the boys, noting their responses on her clipboard. "Are you happy here with Ms. Vasquez?" she asked. Daniel, ever cautious, nodded without elaborating. But David, sweet David, whose heart always sat so close to the surface, leaned forward earnestly. "She saved my life," he said, "when I was sick. And she makes us do homework and eat vegetables, and she hugs us goodnight like Mom used to," and his voice broke slightly. "Please don't take us away." My vision blurred with tears. Miguel squeezed my shoulder. After what seemed an eternity, Ms. Watkins concluded her interview. Her face gave nothing away as she gathered her things. "I'll be submitting my report," she said. "In the meantime, the children will remain in your care, pending the court's decision. Expect further home visits, unannounced." After she left, the four of us sat in stunned silence until David launched himself into my arms. Daniel remained on the couch, his expression guarded. "So what happens now?" he asked Miguel. "Now we fight," Miguel replied, meeting his gaze directly. "It won't be easy. The legal system prefers blood relations or certified foster parents." "But we are blood," Daniel insisted fiercely. "Maybe not by birth, but we are." Miguel's expression softened. "That's what we need to convince the court." The following weeks brought a flurry of legal procedures, each one draining my already depleted savings. Miguel worked mostly pro bono, but filing fees, documentation costs, and character witnesses all required money I didn't have. I began working 16-hour days, opening the stand at dawn and closing long after dark. The twins helped more, taking on responsibilities far beyond their years. One night, I found Daniel studying my account books after I'd fallen asleep at the table. "We're not making enough," he said bluntly, those adult eyes in his young face making my heart ache. "We're managing," I insisted. "The stand is failing," he countered. "I can do math, Maria." He was right. Customer traffic had declined steadily over the past year as newer, trendier food trucks opened nearby. My simple cart with its traditional offerings couldn't compete with Korean-Mexican fusion tacos and gourmet grilled cheese. "I could quit school," Daniel suggested. "Get a real job." "Absolutely not." I closed the account book firmly. "Education is non-negotiable." "Then what's your plan?" he demanded, sounding so much older than his 12 years. "Because if they see we're broke, they'll definitely take us." I had no answer. The truth was, I'd been so focused on the immediate legal battles that I'd avoided confronting our financial reality. The stand was failing. My savings were gone. The rent on both the apartment and my vending location had increased. Even if we won in court, how would I support two growing boys? The answer came from an unexpected source. The next day, David tugged me to his school's bulletin board after I picked them up. "Look," he said, pointing to a flyer. "The Jefferson Street Festival needs food vendors." I scanned the details. The annual festival drew thousands from across the city, but vendor fees were steep, $500 I didn't have. "It's a great idea, but—" "Miguel would loan us the money," Daniel interrupted. "He believes in us." "I can't ask him for more than he's already given," I protested. "Then we'll earn it," David said determinedly. "We've got 3 weeks." Something in his expression, that unshakable belief that we could overcome anything together, kindled hope in my chest. That evening, the twins unveiled their plan: special weekend menu items, expanded hours, and Daniel's secret weapon, social media. He'd befriended a classmate with a popular food blog who agreed to feature our stand in exchange for free meals. "People love stories," Daniel explained. "And we have a good one." I stared at these boys, these extraordinary children who had endured so much yet refused to surrender to circumstance, and felt a fierce pride unlike anything I'd known before. "Okay," I said. "Let's do this." What followed was the most exhausting and exhilarating 3 weeks of my life. We worked around the clock, the twins rushing to the stand after school, all of us collapsing into bed long past midnight only to rise before dawn. Daniel's social media strategy brought in curious new customers. David charmed them with his infectious enthusiasm. And my food, my grandmother's recipes passed down through generations, kept them coming back. On the night before vendor fees were due, we counted our earnings together at the kitchen table. $487, I announced, heart sinking. So close, yet still short. David's face fell, but Daniel remained oddly calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "This was in your coat pocket," he said quietly. "You told me to wash it, remember?" I stared at the money, then at Daniel's face. He'd known all along we would be short. He'd saved this, waiting for this moment. "We did it," David breathed, eyes wide with wonder. "We really did it." As I enfolded them both in a fierce hug, I thought, no matter what happened with the court, with the social workers, with the uncertain future looming before us, these boys had taught me something invaluable. Family isn't just made by blood or legal documents. It's forged in struggle, in sacrifice, in the small moments of choosing each other day after day. "The festival's just the beginning," I whispered into their hair. "Just wait and see." The Jefferson Street Festival dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt like a good omen. We'd been up since 4, preparing massive batches of carnitas, rice, and beans, filling coolers with homemade aguas frescas, and packing our small cart with more food than it had ever held. Miguel arrived at 6 to help transport everything, his SUV loaded to capacity. He'd done more than loan us the remaining $13 for the vendor fee. He'd spent the previous evening helping us create a proper banner with our stand's name, Casa Vasquez, food that feels like home. "Ready?" he asked as we surveyed our festival booth, a significant upgrade from our usual street corner setup. I looked at the twins, their faces alight with anticipation, and nodded. "Ready." The festival opened at 10, but crowds began forming earlier. By 11, we had a modest line. By noon, the line stretched down the block. Word had spread through Daniel's social media campaign, and people came specifically looking for us. "Is this the place with the twins?" I heard someone ask, and realized that Daniel had done more than advertise our food. He'd told our story, or parts of it. The community had responded. David proved to be a natural salesman, his easy smile and enthusiastic recommendations winning over customers. Daniel, more reserved, managed the money with meticulous precision. And I cooked, channeling every lesson my grandmother had taught me, every secret ingredient, every technique polished over generations. By mid-afternoon, we'd sold out of everything except rice and a few portions of beans. People were still lining up, disappointed when we had to turn them away. "Take their names," Daniel suggested quickly. "Tell them we can deliver tomorrow." I stared at him. "Deliver? We don't do delivery." "We do now," he replied with that preternatural confidence. "We have Miguel's car until tomorrow, right? We can make the food tonight and deliver it fresh." That night, we took 42 delivery orders, mapping an efficient route through the city. We cooked until nearly midnight, fell into bed exhausted, and woke at dawn to begin deliveries. The customers' faces when we arrived, Maria and her 2 young helpers bringing fresh, homemade Mexican food straight to their doors, cemented something in my mind. Daniel was right. We needed to evolve. The festival became a turning point. We returned to our regular stand with a new strategy, limited lunch service at our usual location, then afternoon and evening deliveries to expanding neighborhoods. Word spread. Orders increased. For the first time since opening my humble cart 5 years ago, I saw the possibility of real success. "We need a proper truck," Daniel announced one evening as we counted the day's earnings. "A food truck with a real kitchen. Those cost thousands," I reminded him. "We're saving," he countered. "At this rate, we could have enough for a down payment in 6 months." His confidence was infectious, and I found myself believing. The timing seemed perfect too. Our 3rd court date regarding guardianship was approaching, and our improved financial situation could only help our case. But life rarely follows the paths we imagine. 3 days before our court appearance, Ms. Watkins arrived for another unannounced visit, accompanied by a thin man in an expensive suit. "This is Mr. Jenkins," she introduced him. "He represents Howard Mercer." My blood ran cold. "Who?" "The boy's paternal uncle," Mr. Jenkins replied smoothly. "My client recently discovered his nephew's situation and wishes to claim custody." Daniel, who had been setting the table for dinner, went utterly still. David, beside him, looked confused. "We don't have an uncle," David said. Mr. Jenkins smiled thinly. "Your father, Robert Mercer, had a brother. Howard has been searching for you since learning of your mother's passing." "That's a lie," Daniel's voice cut like steel. "Dad never mentioned a brother. Not once." Something flickered across Mr. Jenkins' face, discomfort, perhaps, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Nevertheless, blood relation takes precedence in these matters. Mr. Mercer is prepared to provide a stable home for both boys." "They have a stable home," I interjected, finding my voice at last. "Here. With me." Ms. Watkins cleared her throat. "This development will need to be addressed at Thursday's hearing." After they left, an oppressive silence filled our small apartment. David broke it first, his voice small and frightened. "They can't make us go with someone we don't know, can they?" I wanted to reassure him, to promise that nothing would change, but the truth struck like a physical blow. Legally, a blood relative, even one who had never before acknowledged the twins' existence, might have a stronger claim than me. "I won't let them separate us," I promised instead. "No matter what." That night, after the boys were asleep, I called Miguel in a panic. His response was measured, professional, but I heard the concern beneath. "Blood relatives typically have priority," he confirmed my fears. "But there are exceptions, especially if the relationship is previously undocumented and the children are established in a stable environment." "What do we know about this Howard Mercer?" I asked. "Nothing yet," Miguel replied. "But I'll find out everything by morning." True to his word, Miguel arrived at breakfast with a folder of information. Howard Mercer existed, all right, wealthy real estate developer from Chicago, no criminal record, financially stable, and indeed the brother of Robert Mercer, the twins' father. "He looks perfect on paper," Miguel admitted reluctantly. "But something feels off. Why come forward now, more than a year after their mother's death?" Daniel, who had been silently absorbing this information, suddenly spoke. "The festival. The social media. He saw us online." The realization dawned slowly. Daniel's marketing campaign, the very thing that had saved our business, had made the twins visible. Visible enough for this long-lost uncle to find them. "But why would he want us?" David asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. No one had an answer, but as we prepared for Thursday's hearing, a sick feeling settled in my stomach. Something about this sudden appearance felt calculated, wrong. But proving it would be another matter entirely. The morning of the hearing, we dressed in our best clothes, the twins in matching button-down shirts I'd splurged on for the occasion, me in the only dress I owned that wasn't stained from cooking. As we waited for Miguel to pick us up, David suddenly threw his arms around my waist. "No matter what happens," he whispered fiercely, "you're our real family." Daniel, never one for physical displays of affection, simply met my eyes and nodded once, a gesture that contained all the love and determination a 12-year-old boy could muster. In that moment, I made a silent vow I would fight for these children with everything I had. If the system wouldn't recognize the family we'd built, then we would have to find another way. What I couldn't know then was just how far that fight would take us, or the extraordinary turn our lives were about to take. The courthouse loomed before us, a stone fortress of rules and procedures that seemed designed to intimidate. Inside, the fluorescent lighting cast everyone in a sickly pallor as we waited on hard wooden benches outside courtroom C. Miguel reviewed documents beside me, occasionally murmuring reassurances that sounded hollow even to him. "Remember," he said quietly, "speak only when addressed directly by the judge. Answer honestly but briefly. Let me handle the legal arguments." I nodded mechanically, my attention fixed on the twins. They sat perfectly still, shoulders touching, their identical faces set in expressions of grim determination too mature for children their age. David's leg bounced with nervous energy despite his best efforts to control it. Daniel stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I worried he might crack a tooth. At precisely 10:15 a.m., a door at the end of the hallway opened, and I got my first glimpse of Howard Mercer. The resemblance struck me like a physical blow. He had the same high cheekbones as the twins, the same dark eyes, even a similar way of carrying himself. Impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he exuded wealth and confidence. Beside him, Mr. Jenkins consulted a leather portfolio while Ms. Watkins approached with a professional nod. Daniel saw him too. I felt him stiffen beside me, heard his sharp intake of breath. "That's him," he whispered. "He looks like Dad." Before I could respond, the bailiff called our case number, and we filed into the courtroom. Judge Harriet Coleman, a severe-looking woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, surveyed the assembled parties without expression. The proceedings began with formal introductions, legal jargon washing over me in a terrifying wave as Miguel presented our case. My hands trembled as I signed affidavits, my voice sounding distant and strange when I answered the judge's questions. Then Howard Mercer took the stand, and everything changed. "Your Honor," he began, his voice rich and confident, "I only recently learned of my nephew's situation through a social media post. I was estranged from my brother Robert for many years due to personal differences. When he died, I wasn't notified. When their mother passed, I remained unaware." He paused, a practiced look of regret crossing his features. "I deeply regret the time lost. But now that I've found my brother's sons, I want nothing more than to provide them the life they deserve. I have a home in Chicago with room for both boys. The best schools, the best opportunities. Everything my brother would have wanted for them." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And what of their current situation with Ms. Vasquez?" Howard's expression shifted to one of carefully manufactured compassion. "I understand Ms. Vasquez has been caring for the boys, and I commend her generosity. But a small apartment above a failing food stand hardly compares to the stability I can provide. I've established a trust fund for both boys' education. They'll want for nothing." "That's not true." David's voice rang out suddenly, earning a sharp rap of the judge's gavel. "Young man, you'll have your turn to speak," she admonished. When the twins finally testified, their words came straight from their hearts. David spoke of nightmares that only I knew how to soothe, of how I remembered his allergies and made sure he took his medicine. Daniel, less emotional but equally determined, detailed our daily routines, our growing business, the home we'd built together. "Ms. Vasquez isn't just taking care of us," Daniel concluded, his young voice steady. "She's teaching us to take care of ourselves. And each other." I felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. Whatever happened next, these extraordinary boys had become the people they were meant to be. When the judge called a brief recess to review the evidence, Miguel pulled me aside, his expression grave. "Mercer's legal claim is strong," he admitted. "And his resources are considerable. But something isn't right." "What do you mean?" I had a colleague dig deeper into his background. Howard Mercer's company has been under investigation for financial irregularities. Nothing proven, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Why would that make him want custody of two boys he's never met? Miguel's expression darkened. "That's what worries me." Before he could elaborate, we were called back into the courtroom. Judge Coleman's decision landed like a physical blow. Pending further investigation, temporary custody of Daniel and David Mercer is awarded to their uncle, Howard Mercer, for a period of 30 days. During this time, Ms. Vasquez will be granted visitation rights on weekends. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. David let out a small, wounded sound. Daniel went utterly silent, his face a mask of betrayal. "Your Honor," Miguel began to protest, but the judge raised her hand. "This is a temporary arrangement, Counselor. We will reconvene in 30 days to reassess, after the boys have had an opportunity to establish a relationship with their uncle." Howard Mercer's smile held victory as he approached the twins. "We'll leave for Chicago tomorrow morning. You'll love it there, boys. We have to go with him," David whispered to me, his eyes wide with panic. I knelt before him, taking both their hands in mine. "Just for a little while," I promised, though my heart was shattering. "I'll see you every weekend. And in 30 days, we'll fix this." "What if we can't?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. I met his gaze steadily. "Then we'll find another way. We're family. Nothing changes that." As they were led away, David looking back repeatedly until they turned the corner, I remained rooted to the spot, a hollowness spreading through my chest. Miguel's hand on my shoulder barely registered. "This isn't over," he said firmly. "In fact, I think it's just beginning." "What do you mean?" "I mean," he replied, his voice dropping to ensure only I could hear, "there's something off about Mercer's sudden interest in the boys. And I intend to find out what it is." That night, alone in our apartment, I sat on the twins' empty bed, clutching the sweatshirt David had forgotten in our rush that morning. The silence was deafening. No bickering over bathroom time, no Daniel's quiet reading, no David's endless chatter. Just as grief threatened to overwhelm me, my phone rang. An unknown Chicago number. "Maria?" David's voice came through, hushed and frightened. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I managed, tears streaming unchecked. "Are you okay?" "For now," he whispered. "But something's wrong. Uncle Howard keeps asking about Mom's things. If she left anything for us. Important papers or stuff from Dad." In the background, I heard Daniel's voice. "Tell her about the safe." "There's a safe in his office," David continued quickly. "We saw him putting papers in it with our names on them. And he was talking to someone on the phone about some kind of trust." My conversation with Miguel rushed back to me. "Listen carefully," I said, injecting calm I didn't feel into my voice. "Don't let on that you suspect anything. Just observe and remember. I'll be there this weekend, and we'll figure this out. Promise?" "I promise," I said, with more conviction than I'd felt since the judge's ruling. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." As we disconnected, determination replaced despair. Howard Mercer might have money and legal standing, but he'd underestimated 3 crucial facts: the intelligence of these boys, the depth of our bond, and just how far I would go to protect what was mine. The 5 days before my first allowed visit stretched like years. I threw myself into work, expanding deliveries, taking every order possible. Not just to distract myself, but because I needed money for travel to Chicago, for legal fees, for whatever battle lay ahead. Miguel called daily with updates on his investigation into Howard Mercer. His company's been struggling, he reported on Wednesday. 3 failed development projects in the last year. Heavy debt load. Yet suddenly he's flush with cash again, buying property in downtown Chicago. What does that have to do with the twins? I'm not sure yet. But there's something about their father's estate I can't access, record sealed by court order in Illinois. Friday morning, I boarded a bus to Chicago with a small suitcase and a larger sense of dread. The journey gave me too much time to think, to imagine worst-case scenarios. By the time I arrived at the address Howard had provided, a gleaming high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan, my nerves were frayed to breaking. The doorman eyed my worn jeans and simple jacket dubiously before calling up to confirm my visit. The elevator ride to the 37th floor felt like ascending into enemy territory. Howard opened the door himself, his welcoming smile not reaching his eyes. "Maria, right on time. The boys are eager to see you." The apartment was a showcase of wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years, art on the walls that looked museum quality. But all I cared about was the 2 small figures that launched themselves at me the moment I stepped inside. "Maria!" David's arms wrapped around my waist so tightly I could barely breathe. Daniel, more reserved but equally intense, gripped my hand like he might never let go. Howard watched our reunion with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "You have until Sunday evening," he said pleasantly. "I've made up the guest room for you." The boys gave me a tour that quickly revealed the hollow nature of their luxurious prison. Yes, they each had their own bedroom with expensive electronics and new clothes. Yes, there was a chef who prepared whatever they requested. But the tension in their shoulders, the careful way they monitored Howard's location as they spoke, told the real story. "He's been asking questions about Mom," Daniel whispered when we finally had a moment alone in my assigned guest room. "About where she kept important papers, if Dad ever mentioned investments." "He took our phones," David added. "We're using his iPad to talk to you, but he checks it every night." "And the safe?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Daniel nodded. "In his office. Password protected. We've seen him go in there late at night, talking on the phone about finalizing the transfer and accessing the accounts." That night, after the twins went to bed, I sat in the palatial living room with Howard, both of us pretending at civility over expensive scotch I didn't touch. "They're remarkable boys," Howard said, swirling his drink. "So much potential. Daniel especially, he has a mind for business." "They're survivors," I replied. "They've been through more than children should ever experience." His expression shifted, something calculating entering his eyes. "Their mother's illness must have been difficult." "Did she ever discuss provisions for them?" "Financial arrangements, perhaps." The question confirmed my suspicions. This was about money. She was focused on saying goodbye to her sons, I said carefully. On making sure they would be loved after she was gone. Disappointment flickered across his face before he masked it with another practiced smile. "Of course. Well, I should turn in. Big day tomorrow. I'm taking them to my office, showing Daniel how real estate development works." Once alone, I texted Miguel what I'd learned. His response came minutes later, looking into Robert Mercer's financial history. "Something big. Call tomorrow." The weekend passed in a strange dance, Howard playing the doting uncle when present, disappearing for hours on business while I treasured every moment with the boys. We cooked together in the massive, underused kitchen, laughed over board games, and whispered plans late into the night. "If the judge doesn't fix this," Daniel asked on Saturday night, his voice small despite his attempt at stoicism, "what happens?" I met his gaze steadily. "Then we find another way. I promised you, remember? We're family." "But he's rich," David said. "And he has lawyers and this fancy place." "Some things matter more than money," I told them. "Trust, love, truth. And the truth has a way of coming to light." Sunday evening arrived too quickly. As I prepared to leave, Howard made a point of reminding me, the final hearing is in 3 weeks. I'm sure by then the boys will have adjusted to their new life. The twins clung to me at the door, David openly crying, Daniel fighting to maintain his composure. 21 days, I whispered, hugging them fiercely. Stay strong. Observe everything. On the bus back to my empty apartment, Miguel called with the breakthrough we needed. Robert Mercer, he said without preamble. The twins' father. He wasn't just some random guy who abandoned his family. He was a software engineer who developed a proprietary algorithm for financial trading. What does that mean? It means, Miguel continued, excitement evident in his voice, that he left an inheritance. A big one. But it was in trust for the boys, accessible only when they turned 18 or if their mother designated a financial guardian. The pieces clicked into place. Howard needs control of the twins to access the money. Exactly. And based on my sources, we're talking millions. So what now? Now, Miguel said grimly, we find proof of his intentions. And I think I know where to look. The next 3 weeks became a carefully orchestrated mission. While I maintained the food stand and prepared for my next weekend visit, Miguel worked his legal contacts in Chicago. We needed evidence that Howard's interest was purely financial, that he saw the twins as access to money, not as family to love. The night before my second visit, Miguel called with an urgent update. Howard's company is on the verge of bankruptcy. He's leveraged everything on a development deal that closes next week. Without a major cash infusion. He needs the twins' inheritance, I finished. Not just needs, he's already started the process to access it. Paperwork has been filed claiming financial guardianship. The hearing to approve it is scheduled for the day after your custody hearing. Cold determination settled over me. Then we have exactly 1 weekend to stop him. As I packed for Chicago the second time, I included something that hadn't been in my suitcase before, a small digital recorder Miguel had provided, along with explicit instructions on exactly what we needed to capture. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about protecting the twins from a man who saw them as nothing more than dollar signs. A man who would use them and discard them once he had what he wanted. I boarded the bus to Chicago with the weight of our future pressing down on me, knowing that the next 48 hours would determine everything. My second arrival at Howard's Chicago high-rise felt different. Where fear had dominated my first visit, now determination steeled my nerves. The twins met me with tighter hugs, thinner faces, and eyes that had grown sharper in just 2 weeks. "He's getting impatient," Daniel whispered as he helped carry my bag to the guest room. "Making phone calls at night, arguing about deadlines." "The safe?" I asked quietly. "Still locked. But we heard him tell someone the hearing is next week. Something about accessing the accounts immediately after." David perched on the edge of the bed, uncharacteristically serious. "He doesn't really want us, does he? Just the money." The raw understanding in his young voice broke my heart. "I think so," I answered honestly. "But we're going to prove it." I showed them the recorder, explaining Miguel's plan. We needed Howard, in his own words, admitting his true intentions. The risk was enormous. If caught, I could lose visitation rights entirely. But the alternative was unthinkable. "I'll do it," Daniel volunteered immediately. "No," I said firmly. "This is my responsibility." "But he's more careful around you," he argued. "With us, especially when he's been drinking, he slips. Says things." The maturity in his face, the calculation, the willingness to put himself at risk, reminded me how much he'd been forced to grow up in the past year. "We do it together," I compromised. "Or not at all." That evening, Howard returned with an expensive bottle of wine and forced conviviality. I accepted a glass, pretending to sip while he poured himself a second, then a third. "You know," he said as the night progressed, loosened by alcohol, "I've been thinking about your little food stand. Interesting little business." "It supports us," I replied neutrally. He waved dismissively. "Small potatoes. No real growth potential. The boys need to think bigger." As if on cue, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Uncle Howard? Can I ask you something about the investment meeting you took us to?" Howard's face brightened with genuine interest, the most animation he'd shown toward either twin. "Of course. You've got a good head for business, just like your father." "That algorithmic trading stuff," Daniel continued, sitting beside me on the sofa. "Is that what Dad was working on before he died?" The recorder sat in my pocket, quietly capturing every word. Howard's expression shifted, caution warring with the loosening effects of the wine. "Your father was ahead of his time. Created something valuable. Is that why we came to live with you?" Daniel asked innocently. "Because of Dad's algorithm." A moment of silence stretched between us. I held my breath. "Family is family," Howard replied, but his eyes had gone cold, calculating. "Though your father's legacy certainly made finding you more urgent." "So there is money," Daniel pressed, his young voice steady. "From Dad." Howard studied him for a long moment, then smiled, a different smile than before, conspiratorial. "You really are sharp." "Yes, there's money. Quite a lot of it. And as your guardian, I'll make sure it's properly managed until you're older. And you'll use some for your business?" Daniel asked, the perfect picture of innocence. Howard swirled his wine. That's how wealth works, Daniel. It creates more wealth. Your father's algorithm will save my company, and in return, you'll have a percentage of a much larger enterprise. But isn't that our money? The question came from David, who had silently appeared in the doorway. For college and stuff. Howard's expression hardened. Your children. You don't understand financial management. So you're helping yourself to their inheritance, I said quietly. Using them to access money that isn't yours. The mask dropped completely. Howard set down his wine glass with deliberate control. Let's be clear, he said, voice suddenly cold and precise despite the alcohol. Those custody hearings? A formality. By this time next week, I'll have legal control of the boys and their trust fund. The algorithm alone is worth millions, enough to secure the financing I need and still leave plenty for all of us. And if the judge rules in Maria's favor? Daniel asked. Howard laughed, a short, ugly sound. She won't. Blood wins in these cases. And anyway, it doesn't matter who raises you day to day. I only need financial guardianship to access the accounts. He stood, suddenly seeming to realize he'd said too much. It's late. Daniel, David, off to bed. The twins glanced at me, a silent question in their eyes. Go, I said softly. I'll see you in the morning. Once they'd gone, Howard's demeanor changed entirely, the practiced charm vanishing. Let me be perfectly transparent, he said, leaning forward. You seem to care for the boys. I respect that. So here's my proposal, once I've secured guardianship, they can spend school holidays with you. Maybe even weekends. I'm not interested in raising children. I just need the legal authority. You're admitting you only want them for their money, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. He shrugged. Business is business. Robert owed me. If he hadn't broken ties, that algorithm would have been our joint venture. My hand closed around the recorder in my pocket. And what happens to the twins once you have what you want? Boarding school, probably. Best education money can buy. He smiled thinly. Everyone wins. I stood, unable to bear another moment in his presence. I should get some sleep. That night, I sent the recording to Miguel, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. His reply came minutes later, this changes everything. Don't react. Act normal. See you at the hearing. The final day of my visit passed in excruciating slowness. I cooked the twins their favorite foods, played games, and whispered reassurances when Howard wasn't looking. As I prepared to leave, David clung to me desperately. What if it doesn't work? He whispered. I cupped his face in my hands. Then we run. Together. I promise. The day of the hearing arrived with a tension so thick it seemed to electrify the air. The courtroom was the same, Judge Coleman's expression just as inscrutable as she reviewed the new documents Miguel had submitted. Howard sat with his attorney, the picture of confident expectation. When he noticed my gaze, he offered a small, triumphant smile. The proceedings began with standard formalities. Then, Judge Coleman spoke the words that changed everything. Before we continue, I'd like to address some new evidence that's been brought to the court's attention. Mr. Mercer, would you care to explain the conversation recorded last weekend at your residence? The color drained from Howard's face. His attorney leaned toward him urgently as the judge continued. This court takes a very dim view of individuals seeking guardianship for financial gain rather than the well-being of children. What followed was the legal equivalent of a controlled demolition. The recording. The trust fund documents Miguel had uncovered. Evidence of Howard's failing business and desperate financial situation. His plans for accessing the twins' inheritance, already in motion. By the time Miguel presented our case, the stable home I'd provided, the business we'd built together, the genuine family we'd formed, Howard's claim had crumbled entirely. Judge Coleman's ruling came with rare judicial emotion. It is the finding of this court that the best interests of Daniel and David Mercer lie in permanent guardianship with Maria Vasquez. Furthermore, this court appoints an independent financial trustee to manage the minors' inheritance until they reach adulthood. She fixed Howard with a stern gaze. Mr. Mercer, you are ordered to have no further contact with the minors. The court will also refer this matter to the district attorney's office for potential charges of attempted financial fraud. As the implications of her words washed over me, the twins broke protocol, rushing across the courtroom to throw their arms around me. Through tears, I held them close, the weight of months of fear finally lifting. We won, I whispered. We're going home. Home, however, transformed rapidly in the months that followed. With Miguel's help, we established a proper legal framework for our family. The financial trustee discovered the full extent of the twins' inheritance, not just millions, but tens of millions from their father's algorithm, which had become the foundation of several major trading systems. A modest portion was released for their immediate needs, enough to secure our future while preserving the bulk for their education and adulthood. Enough to transform our humble food stand into something more substantial. A real restaurant, David suggested excitedly. With tables and a sign and everything. Daniel, ever practical, had more specific ideas. A chain of food trucks first. Lower overhead, higher mobility. Then a flagship restaurant when we've built the brand. I stared at him, this 12-year-old who spoke like a business veteran. Where did you learn all this? He shrugged. I listened when Howard talked business. Just because he was terrible doesn't mean his knowledge was. We compromised. One proper restaurant, Casa Vasquez, in the heart of the city, with 2 food trucks extending our reach to surrounding areas. We hired staff, expanded the menu, but kept the heart of what had made our little stand special, food that felt like home, served with love. As the business grew, so did the boys. Through middle school and high school, they remained integral to our family enterprise. Daniel's head for business and David's natural charm with customers complemented my cooking. Together, we built something remarkable. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the rainy day when 2 hungry boys first appeared at my food stand, I stood outside Casa Vasquez, now one of the most successful restaurant chains in the region. The original location had become something of a landmark, though I still worked the kitchen most days, insisting on making the carnitas myself. A flash of sunlight on chrome caught my attention as 2 identical Rolls Royces, one midnight blue, one silver, pulled up to the curb. The doors opened simultaneously, revealing 2 tall young men in impeccable suits. At 22, the twins had grown into their potential in ways I could hardly have imagined during those desperate early days. Daniel, with his business degree fresh in hand, managed our now extensive restaurant operations. David, whose natural empathy had led him to psychology, divided his time between clinical work with foster children and the charitable foundation they'd established together. They approached in perfect sync, the same way they'd walked as 12-year-olds sharing a newspaper over their heads. "Happy anniversary, Mama," David said, embracing me tightly. After the adoption became official, he'd been the first to start calling me mother. Daniel, still more reserved with his emotions, handed me a small box. 10 years today, he said quietly. Inside lay a delicate gold pendant shaped like a small food cart. Engraved on the back were the words, "Family is what you build, not what you're born to." "The cars are a bit much," I said, blinking back tears as I looked at the luxury vehicles. Daniel smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. "We thought about one car to share, for old time's sake. But it turns out we have different tastes now. And different lives," David added. "But the same heart." As we walked into the restaurant together, I thought about the impossible journey we'd traveled. From a failing food stand and 2 hungry boys to this empire built on love as much as business acumen. The inheritance had provided opportunity, certainly. But money alone doesn't create family. That had been built meal by meal, day by day, crisis by crisis, in the spaces between what we had and what we hoped for, in the moments when we chose each other despite having no blood connection, no legal obligation. That night, as we served a special anniversary menu to a packed house, I watched my sons, because that's what they had become in every way that mattered, working the room with confidence. Different in so many ways now, Daniel precise and strategic, David warm and intuitive. Yet still connected by that invisible thread that had bound them since birth, now extended to include me. A customer stopped me as I made my rounds, gesturing to the twins. "Your sons are remarkable young men," she said. "You must be very proud." "I am," I replied, watching as they met my gaze across the crowded restaurant, both smiling in that way that still made them look identical despite their differences. They saved me as much as I saved them. And that was the truth at the heart of our story. Not a simple tale of charity toward two homeless boys, but the more complex reality of three broken people finding wholeness together. Building family. Creating home. The two Rolls-Royces parked outside might catch people's attention, might even be what brought customers in to hear our story, but the real miracle wasn't in the money or the success. It was in the ordinary, everyday love that had sustained us through extraordinary circumstances. It was in the simple truth that family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes, it's what you build together, one meal at a time. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment and kindly subscribe to this channel.